American movies have long been America's great cultural export. So, how did Hollywood's biggest night become so global? On Sunday, many of the biggest movie stars in the world will walk down that iconic red carpet in Los Angeles, California, to celebrate the 98th Academy Awards. The main contenders for the top spots at this year's Oscars are two distinctly American movies.
Me and Mom used to run around and do some real bad.
What the hell going on?
Oh, we heard tale of a party.
The story of this season is that Hollywood is back. But is it really that simple?
I think some years feel more predictable than others, but I really think that this year there is going to be a lot of surprises.
The Oscars are increasingly nominating international films, films not made in Hollywood, not made in the English language. So what does that mean for America's cultural influence abroad? From the BBC, I'm Asma Khalid in Washington, D.C., and welcome to The Global Story on YouTube. Tom Brook, welcome to The Global Story. A pleasure to have you with us. And Tom, could I have you introduce yourself to those who may not know you?
Well, I've been a broadcast journalist with the BBC for a long time. Actually, April will be the 50th anniversary of me joining BBC News as a trainee in London.
Congratulations! Big milestone.
I'm actually quite old. I'm 72 years old. I was young when it all began, my journalistic career. And I began really covering the film industry, I suppose, in the early 1980s. And I think I came to my first Oscar ceremony in 1982, which is a long time ago.
Tom, you are wearing a tux on our podcast, presumably because you're very excited to join The Global Story.
No, I'm wearing a tux because I'm a very pretentious British person, and I feel it makes me look important, so I just put it on. But the real answer is, I'm an on-camera presenter for the BBC, and we're doing this Oscars preview show. So I've been running around. Actually, I mean, it's absurd. I was up in the Hollywood Hills wearing this, sitting on a rock the other day. But I just interviewed the president of the Academy on camera. So I couldn't really go in jeans and a T-shirt. So, and actually, you know, I like wearing a tux because I'm a bit scruffy by nature, but the minute you put this thing on, it makes you look respectable.
Well, thank you for making that make sense. I was saying I felt a bit underdressed, but
no, it's outrageous. Well, why are you not wearing this kind of tux?
Wearing a ball gown, yes.
Preparations for Hollywood's biggest night of the year have been going on for days. Here on Hollywood Boulevard, outside the Dolby Theatre, that's where the Oscars ceremony will take place. Middle of the week, there were loads of people here, workers, who are going to transform this area, it's rather ramshackle right now, into red carpet glory. And on Sunday night, there'll be hordes of screaming fans and some of the biggest names in the world of cinema present.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about the Oscars, but I would love to just get a sense from you of what you recall from your first year covering the Oscars. You say that was 1982.
Yes, I mean, I was very young, and I think when you're young, the images that you've grown up with in terms of movies are larger than life, you know. So there were figures, I think at that first Oscar ceremony, like Elizabeth Taylor and Betty Davis, Kirk Douglas, all these characters, and they had a kind of power in a way that I find movie stars nowadays don't have. Maybe it's because I'm older and a bit blasé because I've met a load of them. But there was something very magical about it. You know, I was just like a kid from North London. I was in Los Angeles. I was working with Barry Norman, who was a very well-established television critic for the BBC. And my job on Oscars night then in the early 1980s was to go to the governor's ball, which is where all the winners and presenters would go after the Oscar ceremony. And Barry was a real gentleman, but he was rather shy. And it was my job to yell at all these people to get them to come over and talk to Barry. So I was on because there's very little space, I was on my knees the whole time in my DJ, my tuxedo, yelling, "Elizabeth, come and talk to Barry." and so that was my, and she did. Elizabeth Taylor came over.
And that is how you got your start in covering so many Oscars. Now, here we are 40 years later. Well, Tom, we are speaking to you while you are in California to cover this Sunday's Academy Awards ceremony. Can you just give us a sort of brief picture of what you see as being the top line story of this Oscar season?
Well, I think you have to look at the Oscars in the context of the real world, and I think there's a big disconnect this year. The Oscars ostensibly honors excellence in filmmaking. It's also a gigantic public relations exercise for Hollywood. But right now, locally in Los Angeles, the film industry is in dire straits. There's a production slump. People are anxious about what AI may bring. Will it bring them the promised land, or will it destroy their careers? Cinema going has still not returned to pre-COVID levels. So there's a lot of anxiety. And then in the wider world, we have this huge conflict in the Middle East. And so this Oscar ceremony is taking place within that. And I only hope that there is some brilliant cinema being recognized. I just hope it doesn't end up being a hollow Hollywood spectacle.
I've been wondering a lot how culturally resonant the Oscars are, because I saw that in sort of its heyday, at its peak in 1998, 55 million people tuned in and watched Titanic win Best Picture that year. You look at the statistics, the viewership has, completely declined since then. You're looking at, 18 million people last year?
Well, I think why this has happened in a way is that film is less central to the culture than it used to be. I can remember the 1970s. I remember the first Godfather movie coming out. That movie saturated the whole planet. Everyone knew Marlon Brando's lines. Consequently, the Oscars was showcasing films that were really part of the planet's everyday chit-chat in a way. Nowadays, we have movies that do well, but if you look at the films this year, One Battle After Another, I mean, it's a great movie to my mind, but it hasn't had that kind of intergenerational, internation penetration that movies used to have. And I think that's the main problem. I think part of it is to do with the way in which the media has kind of fractionalized in a way and splintered. There's so many different viewing alternatives now.
So before we jumped into this conversation, one of our producers told me that there is this perception with One Battle, which you mentioned, as well as Sinners, both competing for the top slot this year, that perhaps Hollywood is back. Do you have that sense where you are right now in California? Does that what it feel like, that this year is different?
No, I don't have that sense. But the interesting thing is that if One Battle After Another actually wins for Best Picture, it will be the first Best Picture winner in the history of the Academy to have actually lost money at the box office. It will have lost $100 million. So there's something wrong with the underlying infrastructure. The art is fine. So Hollywood is not back. The fundamentals are out of whack, really. And interestingly, both One Battle After Another and Sinners come from Warner Brothers, this 102-year-old traditional Hollywood studio that's probably or possibly going to be taken over by Paramount Skydance. So these are very uncertain times. I have spoken to filmmakers who are very negative about what's going on in Hollywood. They say it's dying, it's dead. And that's what worries me about the Oscars, that the reporting can get very superficial. Everyone in the auditorium there on Sunday night will be applauding, but, half of the people they know are out of work in the industry.
Tom, our show, The Global Story, looks at where the world and America meet. And there is a narrative that's been percolating for the last few years about the increasing popularity here in the United States and within the Academy of international films. This year, films like Sentimental Value from Norway and The Secret Agent from Brazil were both nominated for a number of awards, I believe 9 and 4, respectively. And I know you've spoken to the director of both of these films. What do they make of how their movies are being viewed, particularly at the Oscars?
Well, yes, I did speak to both the director of the Brazilian film, The Secret Agent, Kleber Mendonça Filho, and to Joachim Trier, who directed Sentimental Value. I like both these films a lot, big time. And in a way, what they told me, particularly Joachim Trier, is that Hollywood has dropped the ball in making films for grown-ups. I mean, Hollywood does very well with a film like a Minecraft movie. That was one of the top-grossing films of last year, or Zootopia 2. But art films, intelligent films, thought-provoking films are not really being made by the studios anymore. I mean, they used to make them when I was younger. I mean, there were great films like Erin Brockovich was a studio film directed by Steven Soderbergh. So what these filmmakers...
That was a great film.
It was
Yeah.
a really good film. What these filmmakers have told me is that they see a window of opportunity. Hollywood is not making these films, but they are, and they're filling a void. And the Academy is embracing them.
I have a lot of questions about that and what it means about the power of American culture. But I want to spend a little bit of time with you understanding the history of the Academy's relationship with foreign films. Tom, when and how did we first begin seeing international films represented at the Oscars?
Well, I mean, the Oscars will be 100 years old in 2 years. Is it 3 years? 3 years hence, the Oscars will be 100 years old. I mean, in its early days, well, silent films were around, so foreign language films, as they were called, were not really an issue. They would give honorary Oscars to films made in the non-English language films. But it wasn't until the 1950s that they introduced this category called the Best Foreign Language Film category. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it was a token. It was somewhat condescending. It was saying, oh, we're Hollywood, we love British costume drama. Okay, yeah, there's a world out there. So
we do, but
huge areas of world cinema that are just never recognized by the Academy. I mean, take Bollywood, which is so prolific, and by Bollywood I mean actually Hindi cinema, but also Indian cinema with all the regional language cinemas. I mean, hardly gets a look in at the Oscars. And there are other countries too, large parts of Africa, African cinema. So, they've got a long way to go. Personally, I think it's nice that, they are actually engaging and embracing international cinema.
So it sounds like initially the best foreign film or the best international category was sort of off to the side. It was an island, not necessarily taken seriously as a contender for other awards. But I know that at some point that changed. I mean, Parasite, for example, a few years ago stands out to me, the Korean film. When does that actually begin to change?
Well, you mentioned it, Parasite in 2020. It won 4 Oscar trophies and 2 very significant ones, Best Picture and Best Director. And it's the first time that a foreign language film had actually won that award. And I think that really was a very pivotal moment. There was always this kind of phobia about films with subtitles and that people were resistant to them. Well, Parasite put paid to that. And I think since then, the Academy has definitely moved towards embracing more international films. And it's also, of course, coincided with the Academy expanding its membership. I mean, until maybe 10 years ago, the bulk of the Academy's membership resided in Los Angeles, New York, and London. But because they became under pressure for being so kind of old, traditional white male, they launched a kind of diversity initiative to recruit a broader membership in their voting body. And now I think almost a quarter of the membership is described as international, a lot of them in Europe and elsewhere. And that, of course, has had a big impact in why they're going now for more global cinema. I mean, I think there is a geopolitical element to this because, as you may have noted, I mean, things have moved so fast in the world, but a few weeks ago we got evidence that EU leaders were pushing back against the United States. I get a sense that European filmmakers, in a way, are pushing back against the hegemony of Hollywood. There's a confidence. Geopolitically, people in Europe realize, well, if NATO's not an absolute verity in our lives, we've got to do our own defense. So I went to the European Film Awards and I got a sense of pride that, maybe we could get by without Hollywood. So, and it's interesting how it ties in with what's happening politically in the world.
How do you compute the fact that with the rising popularity of foreign language films, of international films, we're still seeing the key race for Best Picture between 2 American movies?
Well, because Hollywood and the Oscars work hand in hand, and the Oscars as I said earlier on, it recognizes excellence in cinema, but it's also a very important public relations exercise, and that's what governs it. I mean, it used to be when films were in theaters not being streamed so much, if they got nominated and won Oscar prizes, it really brought in extra dollars at the box office. Nowadays, it just boosts the credibility of the people who are making it, and there are strong financial reasons for getting all these Oscar prizes. So I think it's more to do with marketing. Marketing has a very, very powerful effect in America on which movies have prominence. Hollywood and the Oscars are still very focused on American product. And these films that we're talking about, they're not getting massive amount of money, these international films at the box office. So America still rules in that respect.
Prior to sitting down with us, Tom, I know that you interviewed the president of the Academy. And what was her perspective on the increasingly international representation at the Academy? Does she see it as a positive sign for the organization? Does she see it as an existential threat for Hollywood?
Well, it was interesting. I went to the Dolby Theatre just now, where the Oscars are going to be handed out on Sunday night, and we had time booked to interview the president. She's an interesting person. Her name is Lynette. Actually, when someone has the name Lynette, I think, is it going to be a country singer? Anyway, her name is Lynette Hal Taylor. And she's actually a Brit. She comes from Liverpool. And I really actually quite liked her. But, you know, there's something interesting when you go or have anything to do with the Academy. They've got this grandiosity. Could we take our shoes off, you know? Lynette was a very nice woman. And I thought it was interesting that she now heads the organization. She seems very vivacious. She has a kind of young demeanor. And it's significant that she is a woman, because for such a long time, the Academy was viewed as being this kind of bastion of old traditional Hollywood males in a way. And she assured me she was not of that ilk, that she came from a working class background in Liverpool. And I pressed her on this issue of why was the Academy now embracing more international films? And she gave me a pretty decent answer, I felt.
The world has gotten smaller. I mean, just think about how we all communicate with each other now. And so it made sense that the Academy was a reflection of that, and that we're not just a US-based organization celebrating only US movies.
Throughout our conversation, Tom, we've been talking about Hollywood and American cinema as a cultural force, and the idea that perhaps the cultural relevance has been diminishing. Did she address that at all?
Well, she did address it, but, you know, I said to her, look, film is less central to the culture than it used to be. Do you think that's part of the reason why the Academy Awards has become less central to the culture?
Well, I don't know that I would agree that the Academy Awards is less central to culture.
So what did she say? Well, it's declined in terms of people watching on traditional TV, but she maintained that the Oscars is a phenomenon through social media.
You alluded to this a little bit earlier in our conversation, and that is the ways in which what's happening now at the Oscars, what's happening in cinema, is a reflection of the politics of this moment. And I've had this question on my mind, actually, for a while, and that is whether the Oscars really lead culture or follow culture. And I ask this because, you know, several years ago, there was this trend of celebrity activism, at least here in the United States. But right now we are seeing a retreat from that and a desire from some celebrities to avoid political statements at all. I'm curious what you think of the Oscars as a leading cultural force or a following force, and how much you think politics is a part of the conversation around movies and films right now.
Well, the Oscars will make a political statement if no one utters political rhetoric from the podium, or if everyone does. It's just, you know, if no one says anything in these very extreme times, that's a political statement. It's interesting, though, I have covered the film awards this season, and there haven't really been that many people speaking that urgently about political issues. Interestingly, with the Grammys, there was a lot of rhetoric that was very anti the Trump administration, anti-ICE and everything. I'm not quite sure why it is, but I do think I do think there's a lot of fear in the filmmaking community right now, a lot of anxiety. I notice this because, as I said, I've been covering this award season pretty diligently, and I've never had encountered such a kind of febrile atmosphere in a way. I did an interview with Elle Fanning, who is in Sentimental Value. She's the one American actress in the film. And at that time, I mean, there were really awful things happening in Iran. And I said to her, her film is going out into a world where people are thinking about the conflicts in the Middle East, Iran, the United States being divided. So I said to her, and there were about 10 people in the room, her flunkies and everything. Given that we live in these kind of strife-torn times, is there something in the film that you think that could be helpful for people in Sentimental Value in understanding the world? She gave a fine answer. But then, the minute the interview was over, my phone went off with a text message from the publisher saying, "Why are you asking these actors about Iran? If you continue like that, no one will want to participate." And I thought, have we reached the point that we cannot, as adults, talk about the way in which film is interpreted in the wider culture?
Do you find that concern more prevalent when you're speaking with American actors or here at the American awards ceremonies?
I think it is more intense in the United States right now. I think... I mean, I'm still working on doing a feature on how Trump has affected the film industry, really. And it's hard to get people to comment, and I can understand why, because, as I said, the atmosphere is so difficult right now, so tense, that you could get a lot of vitriol because you don't like, Trump's tariffs or non-tariffs that are going to be imposed on the film industry. I mean, look, I have to say it's a fascinating time to be a journalist, a film journalist, because you see the intersection of Hollywood and politics, and you can see people being very uncomfortable.
And it strikes me how this moment is so different, right, than when President Trump first won office. I was thinking back to that year, 2017. Tom, I'm sure you recall this, where the film that won Best Foreign Language Film that year was The Salesman, directed by an Iranian. And this was... Some would say that it was sort of a protest vote by the Academy. It was shortly after President Trump had come in and issued this travel ban on people from a number of Muslim-majority countries, including Iran. And I thought it was really interesting to see the Academy choose that film in that moment and what that meant or didn't mean.
It's interesting because voting for the Academy Awards finished a few days ago, but at that time, Academy voters were well aware of the news that the US-Israeli war in Iran was taking place. And it's interesting to think about how this might have affected their minds in a way and how they cast their votes. There is a film from Jafar Panahi, a very well-respected dissident Iranian filmmaker, in the running for an Oscar. Will this have brought Oscar voters to his side? Will they vote for him because they want to see him up at the podium on Sunday night speaking out about Iran? I don't know. I'm sure it affects people. I know, as I said a moment ago, how you perceive a film is so coloured by that moment in time. And that's what's great about cinema. It's a living art form.
We've had a number of questions here about the increasing prevalence of international films in the Academy Awards. And you mentioned two in particular, Brazilian film and then a film from Norway. Does the increasing prevalence of international films at the Academy Awards tell us anything about American cultural dominance in the movies?
Well, I think Hollywood culture, Hollywood filmmaking is being challenged by European cinema right now. It must be of concern that the studios really have dropped the ball, that they're not making engaging, vibrant cinema in the way that Europeans are. And I think you have to look at One Battle After Another and Sinners as being flukes in a way. Hollywood really, it's a moment of reckoning right now for the film industry. And my concern is that we'll have the Oscars ceremony and everyone will say, oh, One Battle After Another or Sinners, great films, came from studios, aren't we doing well? Well, I'm sorry, that's not the case, but I still believe in the magic of cinema and love it, but let's have more of it and let's have it on a firmer financial footing.
Well, thank you on that note, Tom. We really appreciate you spending the time to speak with us here.
No, I had a good time talking to you.
And that's it for The Global Story today. If you enjoyed our episode, then I should mention that our show, The Global Story, is also available as an audio podcast. You can find us every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen.